Dan's interest in wellness began as a chiropractor, massage therapist, and a longtime vegan vegetarian. This interest grew into a desire to create high quality plant-based health products. This was soon followed by a role as product developer with the largest hemp food company in the Southern Hemisphere. Dan co-formulated the world's first fully certified organic skin and hair care range, followed by winning the 2019 Australian Certified Organic Cosmetic Product of the Year for the Sativa Hemp Skin and Hair Care range. Dan won the 2016 European Hemp Industry Innovation Award for developing the world's first 100% plant-based water-soluble CBD oil free from synthetic solvents and emulsifiers. Dan continues to explore innovative ways to improve hemp products while adhering to a strict commitment to staying 100% plant-based and chemical-free. Dan lives in Australia, has 3 vegan dogs, and when he's not working on hemp, he's busy with growing organic food and other sustainability activities.
Hemp and essential fats. And I can probably hear some of you thinking, yeah, we know hemp seed oil, you put it on your skin or your salad, and there's nothing new there. But I'm going to reveal to you some things that I'd say most people don't know. And when I say secret, this is information that is definitely being kept from people, because it has really potential to change some big things in the planet if everyone knew this information. So we'll start with a bit of review material. This is something that I'm sure all the dietitians know about essential fats. You've got these omega oils. There's not just 3 and 6, there's other ones, 5, 7, 9. But the term essential refers to these oils that your body cannot make itself. So you have to obtain them in the diet, and they're critically important for your health and wellness. If you don't have them, if you stopped consuming these things for long enough, that'll be the end of you. So these are really important, and the only essential fats are actually these ones I've highlighted here in yellow: alpha-linolenic acid, which is a form of omega-3, linoleic acid, a form of omega-6, and gamma-linolenic acid, which is another form of omega-6. And what we sometimes get confused about is the heavy promotion of fish oil. Fish oil is actually not an essential fat. It's not something that you need in your diet. If you consume those ones highlighted in yellow, you make as much of these other derivatives, the EPA and DHA, for example, that you find in fish oil, you make as much of them as you need. Your body just manufactures them on demand, and you actually need very, very small amounts of them, which I realize is probably contrary to what is the understanding of people out there, and it's certainly contrary to what the fish industry wants you to think, and what's out there in the public literature. But that's not what the science shows us. Science shows us that we need these other omega-3s, these essential fats, and the other derivatives, these non-essential ones. They don't need to be in the diet, because your body just makes whatever it needs. Okay, so the other key point about this is that essential fats only come from plants. Even fish don't make the omega-3 that they have in their bodies. They get it from eating sea vegetables, or they get it from eating other fish that ate sea vegetables, but they do not, their bodies don't manufacture it. So it all comes from plants, whether it's these essential fats that are found in animals, or you're getting it in fruits, vegetables, and seeds and nuts. It all originates from plants. And the other key thing that probably is going to be pretty new for a lot of people here, and I see people questioning this all the time, and we're going to explain why, is that omega-6 is the most important. And this is going to be the bulk of the talk today. And so if this is freaking you out and you're thinking, what the hell did he just say? I thought omega-3 was really the thing that we need. And you hear this all the time, omega-3, we don't get enough. Should be having fish oil all day, every day. Omega-6 is actually the one that you need. And I'm going to explain why. And let's have a look at some logic first of what is the body actually made from? When it comes to the omegas in your body, what does the body actually contain? Because your body's been rebuilt all the time. After a year, most of the cells in your body have been replaced. And so you're constantly rebuilding your whole body. So what is getting rebuilt? So this is a chart that looks at the omega-6 versus the omega-3 content of all the different parts of your body, your brain and nervous system, your skin, your largest organ. And you go down the list here. And if we look at the average with all of these things, and just remember this call's being recorded, so you can go back and look at this more closely afterwards if you want to really study it. There's over 100 times more omega-6 in your body than there is omega-3. And out of that omega-3, those EPA and DHA, the derivatives, the non-essential ones that I mentioned, they make up the smallest portion of all. They're really only tiny amounts of that is used in the body. So the body is heavily, heavily dependent on omega-6, and there's a really exciting reason why. And this is one of the big secrets that we're going to get into today. One of the life-changing pieces of information that is just not being taught. There's a reason why the body must have an abundance of omega-6, and we're going to discuss why it is that people think omega-6 is bad, it causes inflammation and blah, 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 all these types of things, these misconceptions. We're going to explain that. The other thing I thought about when I was first starting to research this was, well, if we're supposed to be eating these plants and these essential fats come from plants, what is in plants? And I looked at all the different plant-based sources of oil that I could think of, and here's a list of 21 different sources of plant oils that you probably encounter in your diet at some point in time. And I looked at the omega-6 and omega-3 content of all of these, and they average out to 3-to-1 ratio. So there's 3 times as much omega-6 as there is omega-3. So if God is smart and he knows what he's doing, then there's a reason why there's more omega-6 in plant foods than there is in omega-3. And we'll find out why as we move along. In particular, this ratio becomes more and more important when you get stuck into the research and you find that 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 seems to be the sweet spot. And here's a sort of a sampling of some of the research that I came across as I started getting involved in the hemp industry. And one of the big reasons that people take CBD is for epilepsy. And it was really the thing that popularized CBD in the USA. Was when CNN did a news story on all the little kids that were coming to Colorado to get Charlotte's Web CBD oil, because Charlotte Figge was able to stop having seizures when she took this oil. And then thousands and thousands and thousands of other kids were having the same result. The seizures were being drastically reduced and their quality of life was improving. So in this research here from Israel, this was actually animal research. This was on rats, not humans, but there is human research to show the same thing. They were deliberately giving these poor rats seizures. They were giving them drugs that cause seizures. But in one group of rats, for weeks and weeks, they fed them a diet of these plant-based omega-6s and 3s in this 4-to-1 ratio, so 4 times as much omega-6 as there is omega-3. And they found that in the group that weren't having the EFAs, they all got this epilepsy, the seizures. In the group that were having these essential fats in this 4-to-1 ratio, 84% of them just didn't have seizures. They couldn't create seizures in them. Of the remaining 16% that were having seizures, the onset of the seizure, or how quickly it happened, was delayed by 2,200%. So it was really difficult to cause seizures in them. And of the seizures that did occur, the duration was reduced by 97%. So it had a tremendous protective effect on the brains of those poor little rats. Here's some more research on just on the whole body, actually, not just the brains, but on looking at the omega consumption that was going into babies. And they tested a variety of EFA ratios, these essential fats, to look at what happens if they're having more omega-3, or what happens if they're having the derivatives, and what happens if they're having more omega-6. They found that a ratio of 4-to-1 by far, hands down, in all the tests that they did, produced the healthiest babies, the best results. And this has been repeated numerous times. And this was some research in Canada. Healthy brains. The brain is obviously, as you know, it's full of fat. All your nerves have got fat in their cell membranes. Your brain is very fatty, and it needs to be, because the fat is there for numerous reasons. But what this research found, this again was from Israel, is that the brain has a preference for particular types of fats. And it was this plant-based linoleic, alpha-linolenic, the omega-6 and the omega-3 that the brain prefers. So if you supply a variety of these in the diet, these are the ones that the brain will try and absorb the most. In research on humans in Alzheimer's and dementia, it's typically been very difficult to produce any kind of improvement in Alzheimer's. They found that when it came to the diet, a 4-to-1 ratio of this omega-6 to omega-3 was one of the only things that could show dramatic improvements in Alzheimer's. And they compared this with just taking fish oil or just taking a DHA supplement or just omega-3 on its own. It was really the 4-to-1 ratio that was the sweet spot, and it did the great job. It was most effective at improving other brain type features such as learning performance, anxiety, sleep, temperature regulation. There was a number of things that they looked at. 4-to-1 was the winner. Aging brain. So in elderly people, it's, who is suffering this dementia? It happens as people get older. And what they found was that there is a worsening deficiency of these essential fats in the brain, predominantly because people just are not eating them anymore. As people get older, they tend to sort of settle into a habit of eating the same things, and they might get a bit lazier, and they might not have the appetite because they're not as physically or mentally as active anymore. So they're not eating as much of the things that would provide these essential fats. They found that if you start adding them back into the diet at this 4-to-1 ratio, that was the most effective ratio at lowering inflammation in the brain and reversing the damaging effects of aging. So that the nerves in the brain were actually getting younger, and the damage that was there was reversing. It was having a really rejuvenating effect on the brain. This research from the USA was looking at, well, what does the brain actually want to absorb? And they used some pretty sophisticated imaging techniques to examine what's being absorbed by the brain. And if you supply it with an abundance of EFAs, it will preferentially absorb omega-6 and omega-3 in a ratio of 4-to-1. So that's what it wants to take up. And again, it's this 4-to-1 ratio that was working the magic. Here's a very interesting study. This one was looking at, it's called the Iowa study. This was done in Texas. Iowa stands for Investigating Oils with Respect to Arterial Health. And it was using a technique called photoplethysmography. And you may have seen this before, where they use special light waves that are pulsed through the skin, and it can measure the health of your arteries. And it can also measure things like the oxygen saturation of your blood. And there's some pretty good data on this. So what they found was, with the data that was available, they could compare the results with the data from people of various age groups. So they put a few different groups of people onto a 2,900 milligrams a day. It was roughly 3,000 milligrams a day of these essential fats in this ratio. And after 48 weeks, the blood vessels of these people were 9 years younger. So the biological age of the blood vessels were 9 years younger. So if you were 49 years old, for example, after having 48 weeks of these oils, your blood vessels now matched the blood vessels of someone who was 40 years old. If you were on these for 8 weeks, the results came on pretty quick. The blood vessels were 7 years younger. The biological age of the blood vessels became 7 years younger. And here's the most stunning or surprising, or I don't know how you describe it, but the most amazing result that they found in the study. There was a third group that they had. And in the first two groups, these people had not been consuming fish oil. In the third group, they had been consuming fish oil. That was part of their normal routine. But when the study started, they got them to stop the fish oil and start taking the 4-to-1 EFA blend. The biological age of their blood vessels was reduced by up to 20 years. So that showed that the fish oil had been accelerating the aging of their blood vessels. And just removing it gave them a chance to rejuvenate again. And the conclusion of the study, they found that it takes a full 18 weeks to purge the wrong fats out of your body when you're supplying it with the good fats. So if you're getting onto a regimen of having these EFAs every day, and you can do it for 18 weeks, that's when the results are really going to start kicking in, because that's when your blood vessels have cleaned, and other organs in your body have cleaned out the fats that they don't need and that they don't want, and they've replaced them with these better fats. And so this was a really interesting study. So the take-home message there is, unless you look like this, if you're not a fish, you really don't need fish oil. We're supposed to be having plant-based essential fats and plant-based omegas, and the science is really clear on that. It's having an anti-aging, rejuvenating effect when you switch over to these plant-based fats in the correct ratio. And we're going to delve into a bit more about why that is. And I said there's a reason why the body is so heavily dependent on omega-6, and why it preferentially wants to put 1,000 times more omega-6 into your skin, for example, or 80 times more into your mitochondria or into your heart than there is omega-3. And this is an amazing discovery that we're going to look at now by Otto Warburg. And if you don't know who Otto Warburg was, he's probably the most preeminent biochemist of all time. He was a German biochemist, best friend of Einstein. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize 51 times. He was extremely popular in the scientific community, extremely well regarded. He was a true genius. And many of the famous scientists of our modern era studied underneath him. They studied in his institute and learned from him. In 1931, he won the Nobel Prize for medicine. And the thing that he won it for was his cancer research. And this is a quote by Otto: "Cancer, above all other diseases, has countless secondary causes, but only one prime cause." So he's saying there's lots of different things. It's not cell phones, or it's not pesticides, or it's not pharmaceuticals, or it's not cigarette smoke that's directly causing the cancer. Those things are the secondary causes. They're causing something else to happen, and there's only one thing that can cause a cell to become cancerous. And this is what Otto was so revered for. And he proved in hundreds of research experiments that have only ever been proven correct, have never been disproven, that the only cause of cancer, the only thing that can cause a cell to become cancerous, is cellular hypoxia, which means a lack of oxygen in the cell. And we're going to look at what causes that. How is it that a cell can have not enough oxygen when there's plenty of oxygen around us? All you got to do is open your mouth and breathe in, and you're getting tons of oxygen. But there is a reason why cells are not getting oxygen. And it's because oxygen doesn't just freely diffuse through your body and go in your mouth and then just flood into all your cells. It has to be transported into the cells by oxygen magnets. And the transportation media is the fats in your cell membranes. So the fats that are built into your cell membranes determine how much oxygen can get into the cell. And this is what the research has shown, is that saturated fat, the type of fat that's found in animal foods and some plant foods like coconut oil, for example, is all saturated fat. It has zero ability to transport oxygen. So if you just flood your cells with saturated fat, you're going to starve them of oxygen. Same with fish oil, completely useless. Monounsaturated fats, so the types that you find in, for example, olive oil and nuts, like peanut oil, for example, it can transport oxygen, but it's a very poor oxygen transporter. It doesn't do a very good job of that. The thing that is excellent at transporting oxygen, the thing that you need in your cell membranes, if you don't want to get cancer and you want to get oxygen into the cells and all the benefits that brings with it, is the polyunsaturated fats, these plant-based omega-3 and omega-6. If you've got those in your cell membranes, you open the oxygen floodgates, and it's very difficult for a cell to become cancerous if these are the fats that predominate in your cell membranes. And what Warburg found was that if you can reduce the amount of oxygen getting into a cell by 30% over an extended period of time, so this doesn't happen overnight, this will be years and years of having the wrong things in your diet, that will irreversibly form cancer cells. Those cancer cells, once they've formed, once they've switched over to a cancer metabolism, they can't be switched back. So they have to be destroyed and removed from the body. They can't be repaired. But up until that point, and up until that 30% oxygen deprivation, you can turn it around. You can do like they did in the Iowa study, start supplementing the body with these plant-based fats, get them into the cell membranes. Remember, it takes 18 weeks to get the bad stuff out and put the good stuff in, and you'll open up the oxygen floodgates, get the oxygen into your cells, and they can't become cancerous once they've got oxygen in them. This is what I proved conclusively with hundreds and hundreds of research studies. So what is the best source of these polyunsaturated fats, these plant-based omega-3s and 6s? And I'm sure you've guessed, this is what the talk is all about: hemp seed oil and hemp. Hemp is hands down the best source of these life-giving, oxygen-transporting essential fats. It is the highest known source of polyunsaturated fats of anything in the plant kingdom. It is the preeminent source of these fats in the 4:1 ratio that you need. And it's full of vitamin E. And vitamin E is important because what Otto found was that these plant-based fats, these oxygen transporters, they only work if they're unoxidized. So if you eat fresh, unoxidized essential fats, and you get these fresh functional fats into your diet, then they're oxygen magnets. Then they can get into your cell membrane and do the job they're supposed to do. But if they've been damaged, so for example, if you took hemp seed oil and put it in a frying pan and heated it up and exposed it to light, and you oxidized it and then you ate it, it's going to poison you. It's going to do the same as fish oil and the wrong fats. It's not going to be an oxygen magnet anymore, and it's not going to do the job that it's supposed to do. So you need to prevent these things from being oxidized, and hemp has got a lot of vitamin E built into it that really protects the oil so that it can withstand a fair bit of punishment before the oils become damaged. So when you get your oils from hemp seeds, you're going to get these fresh functional fats that are really good for your body. And it's one of the best, if not the best, sources of GLA, gamma linolenic acid. And this is the last one on the list there. There's the form of omega-6, and we'll find out why that is. That's so important, that hemp contains this GLA. And it comes down to inflammation, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But back onto what Otto was discovering about oxygen and cellular respiration, of getting oxygen into the cells. The reason that's important is because oxygen is used, obviously, to create energy. And the energy currency of the cell is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And I'm sure you've covered this in some of your studies, that when you eat food, in the presence of oxygen, you have these things in your cells called mitochondria. That's those little bean-shaped organs. And they take the sugars and fats in, and if there's oxygen there, they can create a lot of ATP. And the cell is like a city. If you've ever seen one of those textbook pictures of a cell, and I've got one to show you coming up in the next few slides, there is so much going on inside the cell. It's not just a bag of goo with not much inside there. It is a well-organized city with hundreds and thousands of little factories, with hundreds and thousands of little machines that all integrate between them. It is amazing what's going on in the cell. And all of it requires energy. You can't produce proteins and all the things that the cell needs to do, and to detoxify itself and communicate with other cells and produce hormones, all these things. You can't do that without energy. And it's like a city. You imagine the city of Denver, if you stopped paying the garbage collection man, he's going to stop collecting the garbage. If you stopped paying the city water supply, you're not going to get any water to your house. And if you stop paying your electricity bills, the electricity is going to go off. And if you stop supplying the cell with oxygen, the amount of energy that it can produce goes down drastically. And so here's an example. If you took 1 molecule of glucose in the presence of oxygen, it can produce 36 molecules of ATP, the energy currency of the cell. Without oxygen, you have what's called anaerobic respiration, or you have fermentation of that sugar. You only get 2 molecules of ATP. So that would be like going to the garbage man and saying, we're not going to pay you $36 an hour anymore. We're only going to pay you $2 an hour. And his performance is going to go down. So that's why oxygen is so important, is because it's there to provide the energy for the cell to do all the things that it needs to do. And if you deprive it of its energy source and you switch it over to a different type of metabolism, this anaerobic respiration, which ends up filling the cell full of acid, you start damaging the machinery in the cell, and the end result is cancer, along with other things. So how do you get that oxygen into the cell? It has to pass through 7 membranes to get from outside your body, when you breathe it into your mouth, to get into that mitochondria. It has to go through the alveolar lining of your lungs. It has to enter a red blood cell and then be transported to the site where it needs to go, and then exit the cell. And there's a membrane there, or there's a membrane on a fat-filled membrane on the alveolar in your lungs. There's a fat-filled membrane around the blood cell. Then it goes the internal layer of your capillary. There's a fat-filled membrane there. Then it has to go pass out of the capillary through another fat-filled membrane. Then it passes through the intercell space and comes over to one of your cells. Let's say this is a cell in your eye, for example, or your kidney. And it has to go through a fat-filled membrane there. And then once it gets inside the cell, the mitochondria also has a fat-filled membrane. It has to pass through that membrane to get inside the mitochondria so that energy can be produced and the cell can do what it needs to do. So in order to pass through all those membranes, they all have to have these oxygen magnets in it. And if we just do a quick review, remember back to this chart, omega-6 is what the body wants, and it predominates in the body. So if your cell membranes are lacking unoxidized omega-6, then they're going to struggle along the way getting that oxygen into the cell. And this tells us why athletes who, they're gulping down more oxygen than anyone else. They're spending all day, every day, just breathing in huge amounts of oxygen and exerting themselves and huffing and puffing. Athletes still get cancer, even though they're so fit. And it's because if they're not getting oxygen into the cells, then their cells, like ours, like anyone else's, can still become cancerous. So it's not just good enough to live in the mountains and be surrounded by trees or be, breathing in huge amounts of oxygen. It needs to be able to get through those cell membranes into the cells. And that's the role of these essential fats, particularly the omega-6 fatty acids, to get into the mitochondria. And once you get to the mitochondria, there's a substance called cardiolipin. And this determines the shape and function of the mitochondria. So how well your mitochondria are going to function as these little energy factories. And guess what? Cardiolipin is made from omega-6. So if you don't have enough omega-6 in your diet, or it's all oxidized, like you're eating, processed food is full of oxidized omega-6, for example, and junk food. If you're not getting fresh, healthy plant-based foods, your mitochondria are going to suffer. You can get the oxygen all the way in there, but if you're not producing enough cardiolipin, the mitochondria is not going to work properly, and it's just going to suffer, and there's not going to be enough energy in the cell. Fish oil actually promotes the damage of the mitochondrial membrane. So another reason why when the people stopped eating fish oil in that Iowa study, the health of their arteries just so dramatically improved. The cells were just getting the energy they needed and were able to repair all the damage and refresh themselves. So that was super important. And here's this cell machinery that we talked about. And this is a simplified version of it. There's hundreds and hundreds of these little machines, extremely complex, and there's so much intelligence built into the cell for it to do all the incredible things that it does, and it needs oxygen for that. That's the critical thing that it needs. And you can hold your breath and you can swim underwater for a few seconds, maybe a minute or two if you've got a lot of experience doing that. But eventually your cells are going to say, I can't give you the performance you need without oxygen, because you've gone from those 36 molecules of ATP down to 2. That's why you can only swim underwater for a couple of minutes or at the most, but you can swim all day if you've got your head above water and you can keep breathing, because you've now got 18 times more energy being provided to the cell. And so what Otto found was that when you deprive the cell of oxygen, all of these cell functions, they start suffering. And the thing that cells are really hang on to the most, the thing that is kind of the last thing to fail, is the ability to reproduce themselves. And so what is cancer? What is a tumor? It's these cells that are reproducing out of control. They've lost the ability to control the replication. All they do is just reproduce now. They're just these worthless cells that just keep dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger until they eventually, I mean, if this happens in your kidney, for example, they'll crowd out all of the other cells in your kidney and stop it from working. And when that happens, you know, that's it. That's the last day for you on planet Earth. It's your kidney's going to stop, your body's going to become toxic, and you're going to die. So cancer is the cell losing its intelligence, losing its energy, losing its currency, and it all happens because of oxygen. And people are they need to know that the fats that they're eating is the #1 reason why this is happening. And if people could improve the fats in their diet, you could slash the amount of cancer and make people much healthier. And now for athletes too, they could increase their athletic performance, getting more oxygen into their cells. The lactic acid production goes down, their stamina goes up, and you know, they can improve their performance a lot. So this could impact if you've got clients who are coming to you because they're athletes and they want to optimize their athletic performance, then this has a great impact for them as well. Now, one of the things that happens when you have the wrong fats in your cell membranes is it triggers a physiological response that is a hallmark sign of all of the major diseases, and it's a hallmark sign of cancer, and it's something that is associated with all cancers, and that's inflammation. So if you've got the wrong fats in your cells, it switches on inflammation, and we're going to see why in a moment. But this inflammation increases cancer, it increases cardiovascular disease, it increases dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, pulmonary diseases, all the things that you don't want and your clients don't want. Inflammation is at the root of all of it, and it starts in the cell membrane. That's where inflammation starts, and that's where it can stop. And the reason why is, again, it comes down to these fats and which fats are in your membrane, whether or not they're the correct unoxidized fats. And just have a look at the left-hand side of this chart on the orange part there. The N6 or the omega-6 polyunsaturated fats that you get from your diet, they go through a series of enzymatic reactions, and they end up in the box on the bottom left there producing prostaglandin E1, PGE1. And what does that do? PGE1 is the body's most potent anti-inflammatory. So you don't need to take Vioxx and all these drugs. If you can just get enough omega-6, unoxidized omega-6, like you find in hemp seed oil, into the body, you will switch off inflammation big time. And I've seen this over the years that people who do this, and I say, Dan, my hips are hurting, or this is hurting, or I've got this uncontrollable skin condition, I'm just, you know, my body's on fire. They do this for a few weeks and the results are incredible, because the body's now able to produce PGE1, and it's producing its own medicine. It's turning off the inflammation. What else does PGE1 do? It is the body's most potent vasodilator. And so what do you need? If you want to get oxygen to the cells, you need blood vessels that are open, that can get the blood there and to transport the oxygen there. And PGE1 does that. It keeps the blood vessels open and keeps them flowing. Omega-6 also produces PGI2, prostacyclin, which is the body's most potent blood thinner. So if you don't want to have cardiovascular disease, then you need to have omega-6 in your membranes, because it's going to produce these chemicals that your body needs to turn off inflammation and to keep your blood vessels open and flowing freely. And this also has a tremendous role to play in cancer, because you may have heard that typically it's not primary cancers that are what end up killing people. So it's not where the cancer originates. Let's say a cancer cell starts in your bones, and it's going to start there because that happened to be the place in your body that was lacking the most oxygen. And it's not really that's what's going to kill you. It's if that cancer leaves your bones, goes into the blood system, and it's what's called metastasizes, which means it transports to another location. And that cancer now has left your bones and it's lodged itself in your brain or your kidneys or your pancreas or your liver. And again, I'm not trying to just pick on fish oil here, but this is what the research has shown, that the PGI2 is decreased by 42%. So you end up with this slow, sticky blood that you don't want if you're going too far in the other direction and you're getting fish oil or some of these other fats into your cell membranes that don't do what the omega-6 does. So omega-6 is critically important to stop that inflammation, to keep you from getting cancer and cardiovascular disease. And if you really want to get heavy into this topic, this is the book. This is a book that will blow your mind. This is PEO, stands for Parent Essential Oils, and it's talking about these plant-based omega-6s and 3s. This is by a very clever guy down in Texas, Professor Peskin, who's written this book along with some other doctors who have contributed. And this is the most comprehensive education you'll ever get on these omegas and what they do, and all the information I've covered so far is like a kind of a brief intro to what you'd learn in this book.